Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu and also from the international edition of the Hindu, I have chosen a total of 12 articles for a detailed analysis. We have 3 important columns that are very relevant for the mains examination, and we also have 9 small articles that are important for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these topics one by one to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our Hindu analysis, do let me know in the comments. Don't forget to press the like button and do subscribe to our channel. Before we start, we have a very big announcement. Tomorrow, Unacademy Manzil 2024 is all set to be held. It's a flagship event of Unacademy where we felicitate the UPSC toppers of the 2023 examination. It's a great opportunity for all of you to witness the toppers, to listen to them, to get inspired by them. So do attend the session live tomorrow from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. on our UPSC Unstoppables YouTube channel. The link for the same session is provided in the video description as well. And before I start, please note that as part of Conquer Prelims crash course, which is going on the Unacademy app, today Shyam sir will be taking up the 3rd session of Indian economy. So under the static part of the crash course, we are covering the most important static topics that are needed for the upcoming prelims exam. Very soon we are starting the current affairs part of the crash course, which will be held on our YouTube channel from 1st of May at 7:30 p.m. So very soon the current affairs phase of the crash course will begin. As of now, the static part of the crash course is going on. So do attend the 3rd session on Indian economy at 6 p.m. And the link for the same is provided in the video description. You can also visit the Unacademy app, search for Shyam sir's profile, and you will find all the videos listed over there. Or an easier method is join our Telegram channel, scan the QR code or search for Unacademy IAS English. And right before the session goes live, we share the link. You just have to click on it and you will get direct access to this free session. So with this, let's get started with today's The Hindu analysis by looking at this important article from the front page of the international edition of the Hindu. This article is referring to a very important ruling of the Supreme Court regarding the usage of EVMs and VVPATs in India's electoral process. As you know, the Lok Sabha elections have already started. I'm sure many of you would have cast your vote in the first 2 phases which have taken place. So when you go cast a vote, you're pressing a button essentially on an electronic machine called a EVM, an electronic voting machine. Your votes are recorded electronically on the machine, plus there is a VVPAT machine attached to it, which gives you a paper trail. A paper slip is printed essentially, and you can take a look at whether the vote was correctly captured or not. You can see the name of the candidate, the party symbol, and the serial number printed on the paper slip. So this essentially is a verifiable voter paper audit trail. So this is how India's electoral system has been set up, and that's how elections have been conducted over the last few years. But there have been repeated questions about the integrity of these electronic machines, because there would always be a doubt that electronic machines are vulnerable for tampering or manipulation. So these questions, right, which question the very integrity of the EVMs and VVPAT machines, has cast a shadow on the electoral process itself and the integrity of elections itself. So there were few petitions of the Supreme Court regarding the usage of EVMs and VVPATs. So in this regard, the Supreme Court has passed its final ruling. The Supreme Court has said that there is no reason to doubt the EVMs and the VVPATs. The Supreme Court has essentially upheld the integrity of these machines, stating that there is no viable evidence available to show that any kind of tampering or manipulation is possible. And the Supreme Court has rejected all the pleas that were made by the petitioners. the petitioner was basically calling for reverting back to paper ballots. This petition was brought up by a civil society group called ADR, Association for Democratic Reforms, which is a leading NGO and a civil society organization working in the field of elections. So it had filed a petition to the Supreme Court and it had raised several demands, which included reverting our elections back to the system of paper ballots to move away from the EVM system. The Supreme Court has rejected all these pleas, but however, it has issued some important suggestions to the Election Commission. So let's examine this topic in slight detail because it is going to be very, very important for Indian polity. First, I'll take you through the brief history of EVMs. We will also compare EVM voting system with the ballot paper voting system. And then we will take a look at the observations of the Supreme Court and the suggestions it has provided to the Election Commission. See, from 1951 till 1980s, in the first 3 decades of India's independence, elections in India were entirely conducted through paper ballots. For the first time in 1977-79, during this period, that's when a suggestion was made that we should move towards electronic voting machines. And a prototype device was also built by the Electronics Corporation of India Limited from Hyderabad, ECIL, which is a government-owned public entity. So this was the first time an electronic device was brought out, and the idea was to initiate major electoral reforms to move away from the paper ballot system, which had many drawbacks, which had many discrepancies. So to fix those issues, the Election Commission, along with ECIL and even Bharat Electronics Limited from Bangalore, together worked on an electronic device that could capture and record the votes, and a prototype was built in late 1970s. Following this, in 1988, a legal mandate was also given for the usage of EVMs in elections. But prior to that, in the year 1982 and in the year 1980, there were 2 very important developments. In 1980, Election Commission had demonstrated the viability of an electronic voting machine. It had even issued few directives for the usage of EVMs in upcoming elections under the provisions of Article 324 of the Constitution, which provides the authority to the Election Commission to exercise superintendence over the conduct of elections in India. So as per the powers vested with the Election Commission under Article 324 of the Constitution, it had issued a directive to start using EVMs at least in some constituencies. This was in 1980, after the EVM prototype had been demonstrated. So in 1982, for the first time in India, in a constituency in Kerala, in the Parur constituency in Kerala, for the first time an electronic voting machine was used. But after this, the Supreme Court had intervened and it had ruled against the usage of EVMs. This was in 1982 because according to the Supreme Court back then, usage of electronic voting machines did not have the necessary legal backing. So to correct this, in 1988, the Representation of People Act was amended by the Election Commission, that is through the Government of India and the Parliament, and a provision was added to the RPA under Section 61A. A new section was added to the RPA that would allow the Election Commission to legally use EVMs in Indian elections. So this was a landmark moment with regard to shifting from paper ballot system to electronic ballot system. Throughout 1990s, there were many cases where Election Commission experimented with EVMs, especially with few assembly elections in late 90s. The Election Commission used EVMs on a large scale across multiple constituencies. By 2001, there were few state elections that were held entirely with EVMs, which fully demonstrated the capabilities of EVMs and the advantages that it brought into Indian elections. So following this success and following the faith that Election Commission had created in the EVM system, in 2004, for the first time during the Lok Sabha elections, EVMs were rolled out in all the constituencies across the country. So this is the brief history of EVMs in India. In 2013, an addition was made following the intervention of the Supreme Court, another machine was added to the EVM, which is a VVPAT machine, voter verifiable paper audit trail, which is essentially a printer that captures your vote and prints a paper slip so that the voter can get a verification, a confirmation, or an acknowledgement that his or her vote has been correctly captured. So you can see the paper slip concealed within the VVPAT for few seconds, for 7 seconds. And as the EVM starts beeping, the slip will fall inside, and these paper trails are used during the counting. In some polling booths, in some constituencies, some of the paper trails are brought out to match whether the votes have been correctly captured during the counting process. So this has been the journey of EVMs and VVPATs in Indian elections. The introduction of these electronic machines has really transformed Indian elections, because when paper ballots were used, there were many drawbacks. The biggest concern with paper ballot system was that booth capture or ballot capture was a big risk, a big concern, especially certain candidates and parties with muscle power who could bring goons and gundas with them. They would loot the polling booth itself or the ballot box itself, right? Or they would stuff the paper ballots at the last minute by registering fraudulent votes, which was completely eroding the very foundation of free and fair elections. Plus, using paper ballot was a very cumbersome process. It was a strain on the environment as well due to the large requirement of papers. Plus, distributing the paper, right, across constituencies was a logistical nightmare. Plus, recording the votes and even during the counting itself, it would be a very cumbersome process given the size of Indian electorate. Imagine counting crores of votes which are recorded through paper ballots, right, which would be folded. So unfolding each paper ballot and recording those votes manually was a very cumbersome task which would delay the election results as well. So as election results get delayed, it could further threaten the peaceful transition of power. It could give an opportunity for parties and certain candidates to try and intimidate the election commission or the election authorities, or to try and interfere with the electoral process. So these were some of the drawbacks with the paper ballot system, and they were fixed once for all by early 2000 with the large-scale rollout of electronic voting machines. Capturing a ballot box became a thing of the past when EVMs were introduced. EVMs were easier to store, easier to manage. Logistically, it was easier for the election commission, and more importantly, it would provide a greater sense of security as far as the electoral process was concerned. So there is no doubt that EVMs, along with the addition of VVPAT, made our elections more transparent, more secure, thus protecting the concept of free and fair elections. But every now and then, several organizations, several parties, they have raised questions about the integrity of the process. Every party, almost every major political party in India, sometime or the other, they have questioned the integrity of the EVM machines. Be it the Congress, be it the BJP, be it other regional parties. They've all raised questions about the EVM machines. They've tried to make it an electoral issue, right? Whenever they are in opposition, they often accuse the ruling party of manipulating the EVMs to win other elections. This has become a norm over the years, and this is not a good trend. Because any such unnecessary questions on the very integrity of EVMs raises doubts about the electoral process. It could erode the faith that we electorate or we voters have placed in the election system. But at the same time, you need to understand that as voters, you have a right to question whether the process is clear, whether the process is transparent, whether the machines are correctly recording your votes. So that is the reason why the Supreme Court entertained this petition, right? There have been several claims made against EVMs without evidence, because Election Commission has clarified repeatedly that EVMs cannot be tampered with. As the Election Commission has stated, EVM is a standalone device. It's not connected to any outside network, any internet connection, right? So there's no question of a cyber attack or a hack which can manipulate the votes. Any changes, it has to be done manually. Plus, the machine is very robust, kept very safely. The microcontrollers which are used to build the machines, they're also thoroughly checked by ECIL and Bharat Electronics Limited. The Election Commission has given enough proof and evidence to the Supreme Court as well that the entire process cannot be tampered with. It is tamper-proof by and large. There are checks and balances to ensure that EVMs are not manipulated or tampered by any party or by any candidate. So when this is the argument of the Election Commission, right, without any evidence, bringing up these concerns against EVMs would lead to a loss of confidence in the voting system itself. But at the same time, voters have a right to know whether the integrity of the election process is protected, whether the votes are getting recorded transparently. So it's in this context that Supreme Court accepted the petition and looked into this particular case. So after all the hearings, the Supreme Court has observed that the integrity of EVMs has been established beyond doubt. Supreme Court has also recognized that EVM system has actually served the Indian electorate very well. It has simplified the election process, brought more transparency, and it has enabled faster results. It has acknowledged that EVMs are a significant improvement compared to the old paper ballot system. All the problems associated with paper ballot system were resolved. They were completely resolved with the introduction of EVMs. So the Supreme Court has acknowledged this. It has pointed out the weakness of the ballot paper or paper ballot system, right? And given the size of the Indian electorate, given that we have close to 97 crore voters, almost 1 billion voters, resorting back to the paper ballot system is simply not feasible. It's not practical. So given all these points, Supreme Court has clearly said that EVMs have a valid case. Election Commission has satisfied the Supreme Court regarding the transparency and the integrity of the process, and Supreme Court has upheld the continued usage of EVMs and VVPATs. It has dismissed any unnecessary concerns about the manipulation of EVMs and VVPATs. The Supreme Court has also said that there can't be blind distrust. Just for the sake of criticizing the system, you can't bring up these arguments because that could erode the faith of the public in the voting system and the voting process itself. Right? Loss of confidence is extremely harmful in a democracy because when institutions and systems lose faith of the public, this could erode the very strength of the Indian democracy. So the Supreme Court has said, without any evidence, there is no need for unwarranted skepticism. Such questions, without proof, without evidence, will only erode the faith of the public, and this could erode faith in Indian elections itself. So Supreme Court has called upon all the stakeholders to resist the temptation from making such unsubstantiated allegations. The Supreme Court has also stated that there is no point in intervening in the current election process because Supreme Court doesn't want to step into the policy domain. That is left to the Election Commission to decide how exactly elections will be conducted. The Supreme Court is convinced regarding the safety, the integrity of EVMs and VVPATs, but the petitioners were asking for certain changes with regard to the election process. For example, the petitioner, that is ADR, Association for Democratic Reforms, had expressed a concern about one provision in the conduct of election rules, that is section 49MA. Now this rule has been quite controversial because according to this rule, if you believe that your vote has not been correctly captured or counted, you can raise a complaint with the Election Commission. As a voter, you have a right under section 49MA of Conduct of Election Rules. You can raise a complaint saying that the vote you have cast and the vote that has been counted has not been correctly matched. Now, electoral authorities will look into it, and if they find out that you filed a false complaint, if they find out that your information was incorrect, then election officials have the right to press criminal charges against the voter. They can bring section 177 under Indian Penal Code against the voter who reportedly gave false information that raised questions about the election process. Essentially, there is a provision to punish the voter. If they report any such complaints and if the complaint is found to be untrue or false. Now, the argument of ADR was, if there is such a provision, it's going to intimidate the voters. If voters want to raise a genuine complaint, right, they would be worried if there is a criminal provision against them. Because if they are proven wrong, the authorities might press criminal charges under section 177 of IPC. So ADR wanted this provision to be removed from the conduct of election rules. But the Supreme Court has refused. The Supreme Court has said It is a valid provision because there is a need to protect the integrity of elections. Yes, voters have a right to raise complaints, but if there are false complaints coming up, it is essential that there is a deterrent provision to press criminal charges against any such false information and false complaints. So Supreme Court has refused to entertain this plea of the petitioner, and it has upheld the validity of Section 49 of Conduct of Election Rules. The other plea of the petitioner was regarding the matching of VVPAT trails with the votes captured on EVM machines. See, as per current norms, only few VVPAT trails are matched with the votes captured on EVMs. The petitioner wanted 100% verification. Basically, apart from the EVM votes which are electronically counted, right? The petitioner wanted all the paper trails of all VVPAT machines to be counted separately, so that there is a clear match, there is no mismatch between the votes recorded, and that's what the petitioner was asking for. But Supreme Court has refused to entertain this as well. Because what's the point then of using electronic machines if the authorities have to sit and count all the paper trails again? That defeats the very purpose of introducing electronic voting machines. Right now, you're getting quick results. Results can be brought out in just one day of counting thanks to EVMs, right? So the big disadvantage about paper ballot was that counting was a cumbersome process. Now, if VVPAT paper trails have to be counted and matched with EVM votes, it's going to be a time-taking exercise, a cumbersome exercise, which will only delay the results and further weaken the election process. So Supreme Court has refused to entertain this. See, currently, only 5% of EVM VVPAT matching is done for every assembly constituency. The previous provision of Election Commission was that only in one polling booth per assembly constituency, the EVM votes and VVPAT paper trails would be matched. All right, just to ensure that there is no foul play, no mismatch between the votes recorded and the paper trails. Later, following Supreme Court's intervention, the Supreme Court had intervened a few years ago. It had urged Election Commission to increase the matching of EVM votes with VVPAT paper trails. So now it has gone up to 5% of polling stations in every assembly constituency where the EVM votes recorded is matched with the VVPAT paper trails. And in those constituencies where there is a very tight race, right, between two candidates, then as well VVPAT paper trails are used to cross-verify and cross-check to ensure that there is no miscounting or wrong capture of votes. So it's only in few limited booths, in few limited constituencies where the EVM VVPAT matching is done, which is practically feasible. 100% verification is practically not viable, and that's what the Supreme Court also has agreed with. It has supported the Election Commission and said that 100% verification is not possible. The current system is fine, it's well and good. But however, the Supreme Court has offered some important suggestions to the Election Commission because there is scope for improvement. The petitioner has raised some valid concerns. The Supreme Court acknowledges that voters have every right to raise questions about the election system. We need to know transparently exactly how the system is working, right? So any petitioner, be it an individual or an organization, they have a right to raise questions about the process, but it can't be unsubstantiated, right? It should be something valid, something reasonable. So there are few concerns. For example, VVPAT trails, right? If VVPAT trails can be counted electronically, how about coming out with a electronic counting machine, right? Just like you use machines to count notes, currency notes. How about using an electronic machine to count VVPAT paper trails as well, which would reduce the time? That is the suggestion Supreme Court has provided. The Supreme Court has suggested to the Election Commission to work on an electronic device, another device, which can quickly count the VVPAT votes so that we can match those votes 100% with the EVM votes captured. This is one suggestion which has been offered. Second suggestion is that the Supreme Court has suggested using barcodes, unique barcodes on the VVPAT paper trails, so that you can use a scanner, right, and quickly scan the paper trails and get the total votes in a particular polling booth. Instead of manually counting every paper trail, if there is a unique barcode for every party and candidate, right, it will again simplify the counting process. So Supreme Court has suggested Election Commission to explore these two options. Develop a counting machine to count the paper trail votes or use barcodes on the paper trail. Next, the other concern was about the symbol loading unit. There have been concerns that what if the party symbols are deliberately mismatched at the last minute? If you have seen a EVM, you have candidate names and serial numbers on the left and party symbols on the right next to the button where you press. The concern here is, what if few local election officials have colluded with a party candidate and they have changed the party symbols at the last minute? Meaning, in many areas, people may not be able to read the names of the candidate, right? We usually look for the party symbol, which is easily recognizable. What if party symbols are interchanged, deliberated at the last minute? So this accounts for tampering with the election process. So to avoid this risk, Supreme Court has suggested that the symbol loading unit, which is there, it should be sealed and secured once the symbols are loaded into the VVPATs. Because see, even in VVPAT machine, the party symbol is printed by the printer. So there as well, the symbol, the logo of the symbol is loaded onto the VVPAT units. So once the loading is done before the election process, Election Commission is suggesting that we will completely seal and secure the symbol loading units. The Supreme Court has offered the suggestion and Election Commission has said, yes, this is possible. Right? Election Commission gave the suggestion, Supreme Court has agreed that this should be done. That symbol loading unit should be sealed and secured. It should not be available to the authorities at the last minute so that we can ensure that last minute tampering doesn't occur. So these are some important suggestions. Apart from that, Supreme Court also has suggested the introduction of a new process where candidates can call for a verification of the microchips. Please note down, this is a very important point. For the first time, the Supreme Court has given the candidates the right to call for verification of some of the microchips used in the EVMs. This can be done only when there is a tight contest. When there is a tight contest between, let's say, 2 or 3 candidates, the ones who came second or third, who believe that EVMs might have been tampered with, they have to submit a return request within 7 days of the results. That's the condition. Within a week of the results, they have to submit a return request to the district election officer. And based on this request, the EVM chips, microchips, which are loaded with the memory of the votes, they can be opened and verified by a team of experts. Not all of them, but only 5% of the EVMs. So in a particular constituency, if such a claim comes up by a candidate, 5% of the EVMs can be opened up in front of the district election officer, along with the team of engineers from ECIL who have designed and developed the machine. So they will look at the burnt out EVMs where the data has been burnt. Essentially, it has been loaded onto the microchip to verify and cross-check and ensure that there has been no tampering or manipulation. All right? And the entire cost for this exercise has to be borne by the candidate. If tampering is proven, Election Commission will refund the cost to the candidate, or else the candidate will have to bear the expenses. So this is a new provision which has been introduced. Supreme Court has directed the Election Commission to ensure that this is implemented. Is that clear? Now, there is a related editorial on page number 6. This editorial praises the Supreme Court for the rational decision that it has provided. The editorial agrees that there can't be unnecessary questions about the integrity of EVMs without substantial evidence or any proof. Such questions cannot be entertained again and again because it erodes the confidence of the voters in the election system. It has appreciated the Supreme Court and even the Election Commission for transparently addressing the questions and for restoring the faith amongst the voters regarding the EVMs and VVPATs. But however, the editorial is pointing out that if such questions are coming repeatedly, it somewhere shows that people have lost faith, at least to an extent, in the Election Commission as an institution. The editorial is pointing to some incidents, recent incidents, where apparently Election Commission has not acted without bias or without fear or without favor. Election Commission is supposed to be an independent, autonomous, constitutional body. It's supposed to act against any party leader, against any candidate who is violating the basic rules, the RPA rules or Model Code of Conduct, etc. So editorial is pointing out that the doubts persist in the minds of the voters regarding the election system, not because EVMs are problematic, because Election Commission as an institution has lost the faith of at least a section of the voters, because we are seeing that Election Commission is not acting transparently, it's not being unbiased, it's not being completely independent in its functioning. So that is why the editorial is suggesting that Election Commission needs to step up. It needs to fulfill its mandate of ensuring that it conducts elections in a free and fair manner, and it should act without any bias or any fear or any favor. If this is established, the image of the ECI will be boosted in the eyes of the public. That will restore the faith of the voters in the election system. That will avoid such unnecessary questions being raised. So that is one point the editorial is raising, but it largely agrees with what the Supreme Court has said, that you can't raise unsubstantiated claims and question the process every time. EVMs definitely have reformed the election system. It's the best possible system that we have. Of course, there can be improvements that can be done, which is exactly what Supreme Court also has suggested. Right? By giving the candidates an opportunity to raise a claim during any doubts of tampering. Right? Now, candidates have the option of approaching the Election Commission and asking for verification of the microchips, 5% of the microchips, right? Plus the suggestion of counting VVPAT votes with a counting machine, right? Using a unique scanner, a unique barcode on every paper trail. These are some suggestions by the Supreme Court which would maybe improve the overall system in the long run. But the current system, what we have, is the best available compared to the paper ballot system of the older days. So this is something you need to understand from these important articles. Next, on page number 3, we have another article related to elections itself. This is related to NOTA, none of the above. I'm sure all of you know about NOTA, you would have heard about it. There's a lot of craze as well amongst young voters to cast the NOTA option, and this again, right, brings up the topic. It raises some key questions regarding the validity of NOTA, what should be done in the case of large numbers of NOTA votes. So let's understand what is NOTA, what's the provision, why was it introduced, when was it introduced, and what is the new concern which has come up, the new issue which has been raised. So NOTA stands for none of the above. So essentially, in your EVM machines, right, you have your candidates listed at the top, and at the bottom, if you observe, in the last row, you will have the NOTA option. So essentially, this is a right given to the voter to reject all the candidates. Let's say you're not happy with the candidates fielded by the political parties. Let's say you're not happy with the independent candidates as well. You feel that none of the candidates are worthy of representing your constituency. Then you as a voter have a right to reject all the voters by pressing the NOTA button. When was it introduced? It was introduced in 2013 following Supreme Court's intervention. The Supreme Court recognized that voters have a right to register a none of the above vote, because this option was there in the paper ballot system. I'll explain that very quickly. I'll come to that. In the paper ballot system, none of the above vote could be registered. There was a process for that. But once EVMs were introduced and rolled out by early 2000, the NOTA option went away. So in 2013, the Supreme Court stepped in, directed the Election Commission that a mandatory NOTA button has to be added in every EVM machine so that voters have a right to vote. It is a right to vote. At the same time, it's a right to reject. So you're casting a vote, you're exercising your franchise, right? But you're rejecting all the candidates. So this feature was added, and the NOTA button was added in the EVMs with a symbol next to it as well. Now, what happens if, let's say, NOTA votes are more than the votes registered for all the candidates? Let's assume a hypothetical situation. It has not happened, but if it happens, let's say NOTA votes are higher compared to what votes other candidates have got. So according to existing practice, in most elections, the second candidate with the highest number of votes is declared the winner. Is that clear? Let's say, for example, there are 100 voters. 98 voters have cast NOTA. There are 2 voters who have voted for one candidate of a party. Other candidates have not got a single vote. In this instance, in this hypothetical scenario, NOTA votes are not considered. The candidate who got the second highest votes, that is the candidate with 2 votes, is declared as the winner. And this, according to some critics, erodes the very foundation of a democracy. So there is a rising demand that NOTA votes should have greater validity, especially where NOTA votes are significantly higher, and if NOTA votes are higher than what the other candidates have got, there is a demand that NOTA votes should be given greater validity. So a petitioner approached the Supreme Court asking NOTA to be treated as a fictional candidate. A petitioner has approached the Supreme Court asking the NOTA option to be treated as a fictional, as an imaginary candidate. So essentially, the petitioner is calling for NOTA to be treated as an imaginary candidate, and if NOTA gets maximum votes, the majority of the votes compared to other candidates, then the petitioner is urging the Supreme Court to direct the Election Commission to declare NOTA as the winner. Essentially, to reject all those candidates and prohibit them, bar them from contesting elections for 5 years. The petitioner is asking for a repoll, a re-election in such case. If this fictional candidate, right, is supposed to register the maximum votes, that is, if NOTA option is supposed to get the maximum votes, the argument of the petitioner is that there should be a mandatory repolling instead of declaring the next candidate as the winner. Instead of declaring the second candidate who got the highest number of votes as the winner, the petitioner is calling for repolling and complete bar of all the candidates for 5 years from contesting elections. Now, this might seem a little far-fetched, right? Initially, Supreme Court didn't even want to accept this petition, actually. The Supreme Court was very hesitant to even take this petition in because Supreme Court felt it was not a very valid claim being made by the petitioner. But something happened in Gujarat right before the elections began. In Gujarat, if you have been reading the news, in the Surat MP constituency, the BJP candidate was declared the winner of the constituency even before the elections had begun. Even before the elections, the Surat candidate of BJP was declared the automatic winner because he was elected essentially unanimously. Essentially, there was no opposition. All the opposition candidates had withdrawn their nomination, and one of the opponents was disqualified from the nomination process. This happened under very questionable circumstances. So a lot of questions have come up from the civil society, from opposition, from the media regarding what happened in Surat. So this brings up the possibility that whether, let's say, NOTA option was considered as a fictional candidate in a place like Surat, would the voters cast the NOTA option and would NOTA get the maximum votes? So based on this recent development, the Supreme Court felt that there is some merit to examining the NOTA issue. Supreme Court may not agree with what the petitioner is saying, but examining the debate around NOTA is something that is a valid argument, right? There is some merit to it, and hence this bench headed by the Chief Justice of India has accepted this petition. The petition is basically asking for NOTA to be treated as a fictional candidate. The petitioner is asking for mandatory repoll in a constituency where NOTA gets more votes than other candidates. And the petitioner is asking for barring those candidates for 5 years from contesting. As I told you, it is far-fetched what the petitioner is asking for. But given what happened in Surat, given how a candidate got elected unanimously without any contest, without any elections taking place, right? The Supreme Court is considering this question because there is some merit to debate NOTA to a greater extent. So NOTA essentially gives you the right to reject the candidates and still cast your vote. Now, previously, I told you that in the paper ballot system, there was an option to exercise the right to reject. Basically, what you could do was, when the paper ballot system was there, you would go to the polling booth, right? There is a form with the polling officer, right? This is Form 17A, basically. In Form 17A, the details of the voter is present. So they basically take your ID card, voter ID or Aadhaar card, and match the details, and they ask you to sign, put a signature, right? Before the indelible ink is put on your finger, you put a signature on a form, that is Form 17A. Now, in paper ballot system, let's say you finish all these steps. You go inside the polling booth, you get your name checked, right? You put your signature or your thumbprint on the Form 17A, you get your indelible ink as well. But when you go to the ballot, right? In paper ballot system, let's say you decide not to vote for anyone, right? There is a paper ballot. You see the candidates, you see the party names, you're not happy with any of them. Let's say you wanted to reject all of them. There was an option. The option was without casting your vote, meaning without stamping against any candidate, you could fold the ballot, inform the returning officer that I'm not voting for anyone, and drop the paper ballot. Empty paper ballot can be dropped into the ballot box. So these empty ballot papers were treated as NOTA, none of the above, meaning it's a vote to reject. Now, since you are supposed to inform the returning officer, this would be recorded on Form 17A. It would be recorded that this person did not vote. Now, the point here is it would violate the secrecy of ballot, because Form 17A is available to the candidates. Candidates can apply for Form 49O under the Conduct of Election Rules, and candidates can get access to Form 17A to see how many candidates have voted. So there, if it is marked that this voter did not cast a vote, meaning they exercised NOTA, they would get to know, the candidate would get to know that this voter has not cast a vote, they have rejected everyone. So essentially it was compromising your secrecy. The secrecy of ballot was getting compromised. Is that clear? So this was one problem with the ballot paper system. It had the NOTA option, right? You could have the right to not vote for anyone and put an empty paper ballot. But since you are supposed to record this, it would be recorded on Form 17A by the returning officer. The candidates would later get to know when they filed for Form 49O. They'll get to know which voters had not cast a vote, who had rejected all the candidates. So with EVMs, and after NOTA was introduced, there is this option where you can exercise NOTA without compromising the secrecy of ballot. Now, no one will get to know whether you voted for a party, a certain candidate, or NOTA. No one will get to know. You need not inform this. So that is why the Supreme Court is considering this petition. Not that it will agree with the unreasonable demands of the petitioner, but the Supreme Court feels that there is a need to debate NOTA further, the validity of NOTA, especially when NOTA gets majority votes. Because there are some precedents here. Few state election commissions, what they have done is that if NOTA gets maximum votes, right, in case NOTA gets maximum votes, mandatory re-election has been conducted in few states, like Maharashtra, for example, in Haryana as well, Puducherry, and even in Delhi as well. So the state election commissions have done this, right? When local body elections are held, the state election commissions have introduced this rule. It was started from 2018 onwards, that if NOTA gets majority votes, then elections are cancelled and re-poll is mandatorily held. But it's not held in every state. It's not held across the country. Only in certain states this has been practiced. So petitioner is asking for these rules to be implemented across the country. The petitioner is saying there is a precedent. The precedent is that in few states, state election commissions have done it. Instead of declaring the second candidate as the winner, they have held a re-election if NOTA votes got majority. So this is something that petitioner is asking for, this to be implemented uniformly across the country, and Supreme Court feels that there is a merit to examine this issue in greater detail. Is that clear? So please make a note of this. It's a very interesting debate as well, whether NOTA should be treated as a fictional candidate, whether there should be a direct impact on the candidates if voters exercise the right to reject all of them, right? So that is something worthy of considering. But however, it should also be noted that NOTA has not really had a huge impact in assembly and in Lok Sabha elections. It has had some impact in local elections, but when it comes to state assembly elections and Lok Sabha elections, NOTA has not been a very popular option. Contrary to what many believe and assume, the data shows that NOTA has been exercised by a very, very small percentage of voters. Hardly by 1% to 2% of the voters are exercising NOTA. In some state assembly elections, NOTA votes have reached around 2%. In Meghalaya, for example, in 2014 assembly elections, 2.8% of the votes went for NOTA, which is still a small number. But the average is around 1%. If you look at, let's say, for example, 2019 Lok Sabha elections, NOTA was just 1.06% of the total votes. So it is still a very meager number. So it's a very far-fetched idea that NOTA might actually get majority votes. But still, it's a debatable idea. It's a debatable topic. whether NOTA should have more validity, whether it should be treated as a fictional candidate. So that is why the Supreme Court has accepted the petition to look further into this particular case. Next, we have another column on page number 6 that talks about curative jurisdiction. It's a very important topic, both for prelims and mains. Let's quickly understand what is curative jurisdiction. The Supreme Court of India introduced this concept of curative jurisdiction in 2002. Let me explain what it is and why the writers of the column have a problem with curative jurisdiction. In 2002, the Supreme Court invoked these powers. It was a new power which the Supreme Court was giving to itself. It was defined as curative jurisdiction. Essentially, it's the power of the Supreme Court to correct its past judgments, to issue a completely new judgment in a complete departure from the previous judgments after they have become final. Now, let's say a few years ago, there was a particular case. A bench of the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of one petitioner. Maybe 4 or 5 years later, another higher bench of Supreme Court will reopen that particular case. It will observe that a wrong ruling, a wrong judgment had been passed, and the Supreme Court will try to correct that judgment. It will try to provide a cure for the wrong judgment that had been provided earlier. So what has become final, right? What has been implemented already for a few years is now being corrected retrospectively, and a new cure is being introduced. A new judgment is being introduced. This is curative jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Now, some of you might have a doubt. You might ask a question. Sir, how is this different from power of review? Won't courts review their previous judgments? Right? Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a valid question. But please understand, review jurisdiction is completely different from curative jurisdiction. In case of review, right, a case is passing through its natural progression within the judiciary. Let's say, for example, High Court has passed a judgment in a murder case. Let's say High Court has held the accused to be guilty, delivered death penalty. Now, the accused, they want to file a review against it. So immediately they go to the Supreme Court. They go to the next higher court, file a review petition, right? Now, the judgment hadn't become final yet. The High Court's death penalty punishment, right? The conviction that High Court had provided, it was only a judgment by that level of the judiciary. If the petitioners, right, if they immediately go for a review, Supreme Court will look into it, and Supreme Court might decide that High Court had erred in its judgment, and it might set aside the High Court's judgment and pass a new judgment. It might find that the accused were never guilty, and it might even release them from custody. So that is review. Curative comes in later, like for example, a law, right, has been interpreted by the courts. It has been made final for many years. And after that, the court steps in again, saying we made an error before and we try to correct it through a new judgment. Now, let me explain this with an example that the writers are talking about. The writers are giving one incident just as an analogy. Let's say you go to a dentist. You have a bad tooth, you go to a dentist. One dentist says that you have a bad wisdom tooth, it has to be removed. Now, you get the surgery done, right? The dentist will remove the tooth. The teeth is removed. 2 years later, now the surgery is final. Please remember, your teeth has been removed. The surgery is final. It's done and dusted. 2 years later, two senior dentists are examining your case. They realize that the previous dentist made a mistake. So 2 years later, they call you to the clinic again. They say that, see, previous dentist made a mistake. Now we want to give a cure. We want to correct the previous mistake. We are going to add the teeth back. How would you feel, right? It sounds hilarious, but that is exactly what will happen when courts are correcting themselves repeatedly. When something has become final, and if the court tries to correct that again, it undermines the very position that the judiciary is holding. You can't have Supreme Court swinging back and forth over important rulings. We consider Supreme Court as the final interpreter of the Constitution, of the law of the land. We look to the Supreme Court as the pole star when it comes to laws and constitutional rights. Review is fine. Review is part of the basic structure. Reviewing any judgment is part of the basic structure. Review happens within a given time frame. It happens within the natural progression of a case. But after a final ruling is delivered, you can't bring a curative judgment few years later. Is that clear? Now let's say, for example, Supreme Court has said electoral bonds are unconstitutional. 5 years later, you can't have another bench of Supreme Court saying that it was a wrong judgment. Now we are going to restore electoral bonds. That is curative jurisdiction, which Supreme Court has started exercising from 2002. The writers are referring to certain cases. For example, there was a case involving Delhi Metro Rail Corporation Limited, where the Supreme Court completely contradicted itself after passing a final judgment. Few years later, it corrected itself, saying that this is curative judgment. It's a curative jurisdiction. Now, if the Supreme Court keeps going back and forth like this will erode the confidence of the public in the judiciary. Is that clear? Here, there is a very important quote that you need to remember. It's a very popular quote by Justice Jackson from the American judiciary. Justice Jackson had stated, Supreme Court is not final because it is infallible, but it is infallible because it is final. What do you mean by this? It means that Supreme Court can make mistakes, right? Eventually, judges are humans as well. They might lack objectivity sometimes. There might be some errors in judgment. But what the Supreme Court says should be final. The statement says that Supreme Court is not final because it is infallible. We don't consider the Supreme Court rulings to be final just because it does not make mistakes. It does make mistakes, but still its words are final. The Supreme Court becomes infallible. It's assumed that Supreme Court can't make mistakes because its word is final. Now, if you change this part, if you keep revising your judgments few years later, right, through curative jurisdiction and curative judgments, this will erode the faith in the judiciary. It's a very interesting and a very important argument that the writers are raising. Correct? Review is fine, review is different, but curative judgments can have a detrimental impact on the very infallibility of the judiciary. We consider the judiciary to be the beacon of a democracy, which holds our executive and legislature accountable, right? We all have that faith in the Supreme Court because we treat its orders as final. Now we have confidence that electoral bonds will not be brought back, at least not by the judiciary, right? But tomorrow, imagine if Supreme Court itself steps in some years later and restores electoral bonds. That will affect your faith in the judiciary itself, right? So that is why the writers are asking the judiciary, the Supreme Court, to not exercise curative jurisdiction. So this completes my discussion on the big columns in today's newspaper. Now let's head towards the prelim section. We have 9 small articles. Let's take a look at them one by one. On page number 5, there's an article referring to SCO Defense Ministers meeting. The meeting was held in Astana in Kazakhstan, and India was represented by the Defense Secretary. Due to elections, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh couldn't take part. So India has been represented by the Defense Secretary of India, and India has called upon SCO member countries to step up their fight against terrorism. Because SCO is a key platform for regional cooperation in Central Asia, South Asia region, which could help the member countries to counter terrorism. So India has stated that we should adopt a zero tolerance approach towards terrorism at SCO Defense Ministers meeting. So that is the development. So let's understand what is SCO. SCO is a very important topic for your prelims. SCO stands for Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It has a lot of history behind it. It's one of the most important regional groupings. It was established in 1996 as the Shanghai Five. In the year 1996, few Central Asian and Eurasian powers came together to establish the Shanghai Five. Basically, 5 countries were part of it. Russia and China. It was led by Russia and China. And there were 3 Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. So these 5 countries that represented Central Asia, Eurasia region, they formed this grouping called Shanghai Five in 1996. In 2001, 5 years later, they signed the Shanghai Pact and a new member was added, which was Uzbekistan. So another Central Asian country became part of this group. So now Shanghai Five was renamed as Shanghai Cooperation Organization because 6 members were part of it now. So over the years, it has become one of the most important political, economic, and military groupings of this particular region. So it promotes close political relations between the governments of the member states. It focuses on economic cooperation because Central Asian countries are blessed with resources. Russia, China in particular are very eager to harness the resources in Central Asia. They already have major projects and investments in these Central Asian countries. So economic cooperation is a focus area of SCO. Plus, there is a focus on military and security issues as well. SCO countries even take part in a military exercise. There is focus on counter-terrorism. There is a dedicated platform under SCO called RATS, R-A-T-S, Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure. It's a dedicated platform under SCO which has been established to counter terrorism and radicalism in the region. Because the extremism and radicalism present in Afghanistan and Pakistan spills over into Central Asia, and all these Central Asian countries are affected by terrorism. So countering terrorism has been a priority for SCO. There is a dedicated platform called RATS. So later, in 2015, India and Pakistan, which until then were observer states to SCO, they were admitted as full-time members at the Astana summit. They completed the process and formally joined SCO in 2017. So with the addition of India, Pakistan as members, SCO now had 8 member countries. And recently, Iran was admitted as the 9th member. Iran had applied for membership. It was an observer state. Its membership was approved. It has completed the joining process last year. So right now, SCO has 9 important powers from South Asia, West Asia, and Central Asia and Eurasia region. It's considered as one of the most prominent groupings, and it has many other observer states and dialogue partners. For example, Mongolia, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Nepal, even Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, all these middle powers across the region, they are showing interest in SCO. They are trying to join as observers or dialogue partners or as full-time members. Next, maybe Belarus could be the 10th member, right? Initially, it has received approval to be the 10th member, but we need some clarity on this. As of now, it has 9 members. Iran is the latest member to join. Belarus could very well become the 10th member, and there are many other countries across Asia which are very eager to be a part of this organization. Is that clear? Recently, India hosted the SCO summit in 2023. So that is why the topic can be very important. Next, we have a very important article on page number 5 that talks about decreasing solar radiation in India. This is based on a study conducted by the IMD, India Meteorological Department. The IMD was studying the solar radiation received in different parts of the country and how this could impact the solar energy projects in India. I'm sure all of you know that India has very ambitious plans for solar power, right? We have committed under the Paris Agreement that we are going to achieve 500 gigawatts of installed renewable energy capacity by 2030. Essentially, half of our electricity will be generated through non-fossil fuel sources. That is a big commitment India has made. So, when we focus on renewable energy in India, large part of the focus is on solar power. So, solar projects, these massive solar farms are coming up all across India, and the viability of these projects is entirely dependent on the solar radiation being received. But a new study by IMD has a shocking revelation that solar radiation is decreasing because of the presence of aerosols in the atmosphere. Aerosols are fine particulate matter, very small, minute particles released into the atmosphere primarily through pollution. For example, through improper combustion of fossil fuels in vehicles, through industrial pollution, right? Along with air pollution and contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. These forms of combustion, which is not complete combustion, releases these fine particulate matter into the atmosphere, and as the aerosol presence increases in the atmosphere, as the concentration increases, aerosols can play a role in deflecting the solar radiation. Studies have proven that aerosol particles can either absorb the solar radiation, part of it, or they can deflect it, sometimes into outer space as well. And also, please understand, aerosols play a role in cloud formation. That is the concept used in cloud seeding as well. Aerosols like silver iodide are sprayed, right, to allow the water to condense around the aerosol particle, and as the water molecule becomes heavier, it precipitates and drops down as rain. So, when there are more aerosols in the atmosphere, it creates a more wider platform for cloud formation, for more intense cloud formation. So as more clouds get formed, it could reflect the solar radiation, block the solar light, right? Thus reducing the solar radiation on the surface of the Earth. So this study by IMD has established that aerosols are playing this critical role. In fact, we have known this from 1970s itself. Since 1970s, global scientific community has been studying the impact of aerosols in increasing cloud formation and in deflecting solar radiation, which could affect the availability of sunlight on Earth. So there is a metric that scientists use in this study, which is solar photovoltaic potential, SPV. It is the amount of radiation that may be practically available to be converted to electricity by solar panels. Essentially, it's a measure of the amount of radiation available which can be practically converted into electricity by your solar panels. If SPV reduces beyond a certain threshold, then your solar projects will become unviable. They won't be receiving enough radiation to convert it into electricity. That's what it means. So increasing pollution, increasing aerosol concentration is a threat to solar projects in the future. Now, this is very important for India because, as I said, we have put a lot of faith in solar farms to help us meet our Paris climate commitments, to help reduce emissions and switch to cleaner forms of energy. Currently, the largest solar parks in India are located in the northwest of the country, particularly in Gujarat and Rajasthan. And the studies have shown that across northern India, northwest India, there has been a significant reduction of solar radiation. This is where the bigger solar parks of India are located, and the places have seen a reduction in solar radiation. Even in southern India, there has been a decline in solar radiation, according to this study. Please note down that India's installed solar power capacity is about 81 gigawatts as of now. It constitutes 17% of the total installed electricity sources in the country. These are very important facts which can come as a direct prelims question. Next, topic number 6. We have an article that refers to the Dooars or the Dooars region. So the article is talking about the distress of the tea plantation workers in this particular region. So let's understand what is so unique about the Dooars or the Dooars region. Why is it called by this name? Where is it located? What is its unique feature? See, this region is located at the foothills of Himalayas in northeastern and eastern India. Essentially, it is the alluvial floodplains created by the Brahmaputra and the other Gangetic rivers that flow in northeastern and eastern India. It is considered as a gateway towards Bhutan. It lies from northern part of West Bengal near Siliguri corridor towards Darjeeling and extends towards the Bodo districts, towards Udalguri district in Assam. That is where you find these floodplains at the foothills of the Himalayan mountains. It's around 30 kilometers wide, stretches to more than 350 kilometers, all the way from Siliguri and Darjeeling till Udalguri in Assam. Now, this entire stretch of alluvial floodplain is very, very ideal for tea plantations. That's why this entire belt is known for tea plantations, and there are several plantation workers who work across this region. There is a similar alluvial floodplain in Nepal as well, which is called the Terre belt or the Terre region. So please note that it is geographically referred to as the Terre Dooar Savanna grassland ecoregion. All the way from Nepal, from the Terre belt of Nepal till Bhutan, this entire stretch of vegetation and ecosystem that you find, it's referred to as the Terre Dooar Savanna and grassland ecoregion. It extends all the way till Bhutan. Since it is like a doorway, a gateway to Bhutan, it has been given the name Dooars or Dooars. All right? And also note down, it is divided by the Sankosh River into Eastern Dooar and Western Dooar. So this again can form the basis of a geography-based prelims question. Next, on page 11, there's an article referring to Authorized Economic Operator Status, the AEO status. The central government has accorded AEO status to the gem and jewellery sector. A few companies and industries in the gem and jewellery sector have been granted this status, the AEO status, Authorized Economic Operator Status. So what do you mean by this? This program was introduced by the Indian Customs, the Customs Department, in 2011. All right? It essentially recognizes the most trusted suppliers and exporters from India and importers from India. And once the status is given to them, it becomes easy for them to conduct their business. It enables ease of doing business for the most trusted and verified importers, exporters, and traders in India. Essentially, the Customs Department will facilitate faster transfers, faster checking, faster processing of all the goods that they are importing, exporting, and trading. So those who are verified entities, those who are trusted entities in India, they are given the AEO status by the Indian Customs Department. It will essentially lead to faster supply chains. The imports will be cleared more quickly for those entities that have a AEO status. Their exports will be cleared more quickly. So this will reduce the time delays. It will improve ease of doing business for various industries and sectors. Is that clear? So that is authorized economic operator status. Next, on the same page, we have an article referring to the WTO Safeguards Mechanism and the WTO Safeguards Committee. India, along with many other countries, Russia, Japan, Brazil, even China, and many others, they have criticized the European Union and United Kingdom for extending its safeguard mechanisms for the steel sector. EU and UK, they had invoked the safeguard mechanism of WTO back in 2019. I'll explain what the safeguard mechanisms are or safeguard measures. What is it under WTO? I'll come to that point. But first, understand the background. European Union and United Kingdom, they had invoked the WTO safeguard measures back in 2019 for steel imports into their territory. Because Donald Trump, the then US president, had engaged in a trade war against many other countries, including its close Western partners. Donald Trump had levied very high duties and engaged in a tariff war, especially with regard to iron and steel imports and exports. Now, these trade policies of Donald Trump from the US was impacting the domestic industries in UK and European Union. So, to protect their domestic steel industry, what they did was they invoked the safeguard measures of WTO to restrict the imports from US and other countries into EU and UK. But even after 5 years, they have not removed the safeguard measures and they have decided to extend this. So that is why many other countries which are exporters of steel, who are looking to export steel to European market, they have condemned the decision of EU and UK. So what is the safeguard mechanism or the safeguard measure under WTO? It's part of WTO agreement on safeguards. It's part of the WTO agreement on safeguards. It's a provision provided to WTO members through which they can protect their domestic industry against certain imports, and they can restrict the import of certain commodities temporarily. It can be used only as a temporary provision. For few months, maybe few years, you can restrict imports of certain commodities into your market in order to protect your domestic industry. Is that clear? Any issues, any disputes that come up because of the usage of the safeguard measures, they can be discussed at the WTO Committee on Safeguards. There is a separate standing committee at WTO to discuss issues related to safeguard measures. Now, EU and UK, they had every right to invoke the safeguard measures to protect their steel industry and restrict imports into their territory because US was engaging in a trade war. But after 5 years, EU and UK are still continuing with this temporary trade measure and they're extending it. So this affects market access for Indian exporters, Russian, Brazilian exporters who are looking to export the steel into European market. So that is why all the countries have criticized the EU and UK at the WTO Safeguards Committee. Next, on page 12, there's an article related to the Gaza conflict, and it refers to a UN organization called the United Nations Mine Action Service. According to the UN Mine Action Service, there are tons and tons of building debris and even unexploded mines and bombs and other remnants that are left behind in Gaza. And to clear these remnants of the war, it might take years and years of effort. Around 37 million tons of debris has been created in Gaza by the Israeli strikes. There are many unexploded bombs and mines which are laying around, and clearing them is a priority because many years later, these mines and bombs might remain, and if someone steps on it, they could explode, killing the innocent civilians. So in any war zone, clearing the debris, clearing the unexploded ordnance is a major concern. So there is a dedicated UN service for this, the UN Mine Action Service, which functions under the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations. Under the UN Peacekeeping Forces, the department which deals with peacekeeping operations, there is a dedicated mine action service that is deployed in war zones to clear the debris created by wars and conflicts, and also to clear the unexploded mines, bombs, and other ordnance which might pose a future threat. Is that clear? So please know what is the role of this UN service that was established in 1997. Its primary task is to clear unexploded bombs, mines, ordnances, and also to clear the debris which impedes the development, the reconstruction of a war-hit region. Now coming to another article on page 12, there is a reference to the Mattala Airport in Sri Lanka. This is another important topic. See, Mattala Airport is located over here in southern Sri Lanka. Please look at the map. It's located right next to the strategic Hambantota port. Now, both these projects, they were built by China, funded by China. China funded the construction of Hambantota port, which has become a commercial failure. Sri Lanka could not repay those loans. It fell into a debt burden, a debt trap. And eventually a Chinese company has got the lease, a 99-year lease period to operate the Hambantota port. India sees Hambantota port as a strategic threat, as we believe that it's part of China's string of pearls strategy to encircle India and to contain India. Right next to Hambantota seaport, there is an airport that China funded, which is the Mattala International Airport. It's named after former Sri Lankan leader Mahinda Rajapaksa. This airport is considered as the world's most silent airport. It's considered as a white elephant of Sri Lanka because it's been a non-operational airport. Not a single flight has landed or taken off in many, many years, which makes it another commercial failure. Since many years, India had shown interest to maintain and operate the Mattala Airport. Finally, this plan of India has succeeded in some way. After many years, Sri Lanka has decided to offload this debt burden, and it has handed over the operation of Mattala Airport to a joint venture involving an Indian company and a Russian company. An Indian aviation company with a Russian aviation company, they have formed a joint venture and they are going to operate the Mattala International Airport over here, which has a lot of strategic significance. Is that clear? Now coming to another important reference on page number 12, there is an image that Hindu carries. It's referring to a tribal protest in Brazil. This protest event is called Acampamento Terre Livre. All right, in local language. In English, it translates to Free Land Camp, the Free Land Camp movement. This is a movement that was started 20 years ago in 2004. So now it marks the 20th anniversary. That's why I feel the topic is important. This is an indigenous movement by the indigenous tribal communities of Brazil against their the land acquisition, against their eviction by large projects and by private projects. Now, this is an issue that we deal with as well in India. So that's why I feel the topic could be relevant. UPSC might ask you, the Free Land Camp movement deals with what, or in which country do we see this movement? So know the native name as well, Acampamento Terre Livre, or the Free Land Camp. It's an indigenous movement by the tribal indigenous communities of Brazil who are fighting against land acquisition, fighting for their traditional indigenous rights. They're fighting to protect their forest land from acquisition by private corporates, by large government projects, etc. It's an annual protest that they hold. All the indigenous communities come together. They not only display their culture and their customs, but they lead this movement as a political movement against the acquisition of their land, that is tribal land. So it has great relevance for India as well, given that we also deal with similar issues. And more importantly, it is the 20th anniversary of this movement. So UPSC might ask a basic prelims question. Next, another image on page 13, which refers to the Carnation Revolution. It marks the 50th anniversary of this important revolution called Carnation Revolution. So 2024 is the 50th anniversary of this event. So where did this revolution take place? It was in Portugal. Let me tell you how the topic is connected to India, how it is relevant for our exams. See, Portugal was a dictatorship from 1930s to 1970s. Now, how many of you knew that? Portugal was called the Estado Novo government in Portuguese. Estado Novo means new state. A so-called new state or a new government had been established in 1930s by authoritarian rulers and leaders. This authoritarian Portuguese government continued until 1974. Now, this is very relevant for India because this was the period where India had a standoff with the Portuguese regime regarding the liberation of Goa. Goa and other Portuguese territories, Diu Daman, right, Dadar Nagar Haveli and Goa, they would remain under Portuguese occupation even after our independence from British rule in 1947. For several years, for more than a decade, the Portuguese refused to grant independence to these territories in India, which led to a final conflict. India went to war with Portugal essentially to secure the liberation of Goa in 1961. So when India waged this conflict with Goa, our relations with the Portuguese government broke down completely. Diplomatic relations were suspended as Portugal treated this as an act of war by India. So then, at that time, Portugal was a dictatorship. It was under the authoritarian rule of the Estado Novo government. But in 1974, the military, which was frustrated with authoritarian rule, the masses also were frustrated with authoritarian rule. They rebelled. They led a revolution, which is called the Carnation Revolution. They threw out the Salazar regime, who was heading the authoritarian government, and introduced democracy. The military stepped aside after the successful revolution, and democracy took root in Portugal. That is how Portugal transitioned into a democracy. This had a huge impact on Portuguese colonies. Even until 1974, Portugal held on to some colonies. They were finally decolonized and granted independence. But India took the other route. Under Prime Minister Nehru and Home Minister Sardar Patel, India went to war. We fought a limited conflict with Portugal, right, which was under authoritarian government, and liberated Goa and the other territories. So that is why Carnation Revolution could be relevant. It's connected in a way to India as well, because this government, the authoritarian government, had cut off ties with India. It even targeted India at the United Nations. It brought up the issue at UN with help of other European powers and accused India of using force. It accused India as the aggressor. But India defended itself, saying that decolonization is the norm. Right? We took a stand against imperialism and colonialism. And this put India on the opposite side of this authoritarian Portuguese government. So this authoritarianism was brought down 50 years ago in 1974, and that is the Carnation Revolution. So on this note, I conclude my discussion for today. So please take up these two practice questions for your answer writing. It's all based on what we have studied. Please use those points in the same structure to write an answer and post those answers in the comment section. I hope you guys have understood everything, and I hope you guys have liked today's session. If you did, please let me know in the comments. Do press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Before I end, again, I'm reminding you, tomorrow is Unacademy Manzil, our flagship mega UPSC event. Do join us live at 1 p.m. on UPSC Unstoppable's Unacademy YouTube channel. All the top UPSC educators will be there. Your 2023 toppers will be there. We'll be felicitating them. So it's a great opportunity for you to, and there would be big reveals as well for 2025 aspirants. So do attend the event. And also tomorrow we have a surprise. The Hindu analysis will be conducted in a slightly different format, right? So let's see you tomorrow. Do ensure that you attend the event. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.